you get to the point where it's like, there's so many controls and the difference that they make are noticeable, but pretty subtle. And then when you zoom out all the way to like, what's the end listener actually gonna notice? Is it compressed, yes or no? Is it like fast attack or fast release? They're like the big things, really. What I want to share today is kind of like a new way of thinking about compression. It's a model that I thought of the other day, something I've been doing more of recently. It's just a really nice way to conceptualize things. It's like quadrants. So when it comes to compression, there's, our main controls like threshold and ratio that dictate how much compression is being applied. Threshold when it kicks in, ratio how much it's going to reduce the gain. And then we have kind of the logical next set of controls that you tend to think about, which is attack and release. And that's where you can kind of map them out. So if we have attack along this line, and then we have release up here, we can start to think about this kind of core interaction, and it creates like 4 main buckets. So if we have slow attack, let's say actually, and slow release over here on the right, and then slow release down here. So this would be like fast attack, fast release. This would be fast attack, slow release, slow attack, slow release, slow attack, fast release. Does that make sense? So they kind of become our 4 main buckets. So if we're thinking about fast attack, fast release, what does that remind you of? Like if we're using a really fast attack and a really fast release, when might you use that? Kick. So anything that's like fast in nature anyway, where you have to like, grab a fast transient. Yeah. So we could say drums or percussion. And in terms of like fast attack, fast release, what is that going to affect primarily when you think about it? Like what part of the sound? If we think of it as like we've got the transient and then we've got kind of the tail of the sound. If we're using a fast attack and a fast release, what are we primarily going to be shaping or controlling? Yeah, so like transient management basically, because we're like clamping down on that transient, but then we're releasing really quickly. So this is our kind of raw waveform. If we then bring in fast attack, fast release, and for now, just kind of average ratio, hard knee, we can grab that transient. And even with that fast release, you can see it's still, because like on here in a lot of compressors, the release is still going to be nowhere near as fast as the attack. Like the attack time we can get down to 0.02 milliseconds, which is like 20 microseconds. Something like an 1176, I think, is even lower than that. It's like 10 microseconds. So really fast. The release can only be so fast because if you go less than 25 milliseconds, it starts to distort. So that's why on open compressor, that's the quickest setting. And you can still see like the kind of the release stage there. But for the most part, we're like grabbing that transient and then we're letting go. So fast attack, fast release, good for drums, but also good for like managing transients. But what other tool can you think of that basically does that? Limiter. Right, exactly. Because that's all a limiter is. It's like a really fast attack and release, a really high ratio. That would be the difference there to what we had. So we're just kind of setting like a ceiling that we're not really going above. So when we kind of get into like this upper right quadrant, really it's a limiter. And while there are some situations where it's helpful to use a compressor in that way, like drums, like where we do just have like a really fast material, even then you can still use like a 2 millisecond attack time if you want to. It's just going to sound kind of different. If you want that really thick sound or that kind of 1176 sound, then you have to do like really fast. But for the most part, we can, in a sense, kind of ignore for the most part this like upper right quadrant. If we're looking to kind of like simplify how we think about compression and just think about it in a way that's a bit less overwhelming, it's like, okay, well, for the most part, unless there's a very specific reason why we need to do that with a compressor, a lot of the time a limiter is a better tool, or just a tool that is simpler to use in that quadrant. So if it's not percussion then normally fast attack, fast release, it's because we're managing transients, because we want to free up some headroom, which means we can master a bit louder. But generally, if I'm doing that, if I have some material that's quite transient and I want to tame those transients, probably just going to reach for a limiter for the most part, because it's easier, it's quicker, or on open compressor, we can literally just achieve a very similar outcome like that. You can see it's slightly different attack and release. But for the most part, it's not something I find myself doing that often, like a compressor with a really fast attack and a fast release. And even something like an 1176, the go-to setting, if this was a plugin, the setting that it would probably load as, and to be fair, like obviously there are lots of emulations like this that are plugins and they don't load with this, but the way I think about it, like the default preset for an 1176 is attack all the way to the left, which is the slowest, and release all the way to the right, which is the fastest. And that kind of gives you just generally a nice sound. You get a bit more punch because you're not clamping down on the transient too much with like a really fast attack, which is to the right on one of these, you're speeding it up. So it's kind of the inverse of a lot of compressor plugins, which, you would think one is faster, like 1 millisecond, but on an 1176, it's the opposite. You turn it up to go faster. So even on that, we're using like slow attack, fast release. And yeah, it's still pretty quick. But fast attack, fast release, generally that's not something we would do for tone. That's something we would do to control transients, to free up headroom, in which case we can just use a limiter or a clipper. So that's kind of fast attack, fast release. And we'll get into some other considerations there. But the next kind of stage we can think of is fast attack, slow release. That's like really helpful if you've got like a really like picky guitar, for example. Because if you think about what problem you're trying to solve there, it's like a really fast initial onset. And even then you could just use like fast attack, fast release. But there are some problems that you might try and solve with a fast attack and a slow release. So problem solving is kind of one. But again, it's not something that I find myself doing that often. It's like quite a specific problem that every now and then you might have. And it's like, oh, this guitar is really transient. The pick hitting the string is really aggressive. I need to control that in some way. And like fast attack, fast release could do that. But then you get like a bit more notable pumping sometimes if the release is really fast. So there might be some situations where you just have like a specific problem that needs to be solved by that. Or like bass guitar, that can sound quite nice. It's like a kind of classic like Fairchild trick where you can kind of do that. Fairchild, like vary mu compressors. Quite often you might use like a fast attack and slow release. That's one way that people kind of like think about those. So problem solving, and then maybe kind of bass is another common one. And if up here it's kind of like, okay, we've got our main use case, like a limiter or problem solving, and then also we've got kind of like instruments that maybe suit that style of compression. So fast attack, slow release, problem solving, bass. But again, it's not something that I find myself doing that often. It's like one of those smaller use cases. So as we move into like this left side, this is where, at least personally, I find that the majority of applications kind of sit in this left side of the quadrant, which is slow attack, fast release. And that is what I would call like punchy. And that is a lot of the time when we're looking for kind of like tonal shaping, normally we're trying to make things like punchier, more aggressive. If you do that on a vocal, it's going to sound like they're spitting out the words more. If you do that even on like a snare, you're going to get more transient, even though it's pretty fast. Using like a slower attack of like 5 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds can add quite a lot of punch. So we let that attack, that transient through with the slow attack. That's what makes it punchy, right? We're like clamping down on the tail instead of the transient. So if we use like a slower attack, fast release, so even that's pretty, you can see like even with a snare, like using a 2/4, you're still mostly getting transient. If we want to let that transient through, we have to go all the way up here to like 26. We're letting a bit more of that through. We're clamping down a little bit more on this tail. And then as we get like up here to like 60 plus, a lot of that transient's getting through unprocessed. And now we're clamping down a lot more on that kind of second part. And if you just listen to that, compared to, that's obviously drastically more compression, but fast attack, if we pull this up a bit, we've lost. Let's do some makeup gain. So this is the clean, and this is with fast attack. We lose some of that onset, right? Personally, I'm not a huge fan of 1176s on kicks and snares. I quite like the sound of a lot of 1176 plugins, but if you load them up in Plugin Doctor, the attack time is often actually quite slow. Compared to like an analog 1176, it's so fast. It's like a very specific sound. Personally, for the most part, like slower attacks, even on like snares. So if we go something like that. And that fast release. We're bringing out that transient a lot more. It sounds more aggressive. Part of that punchiness is the slow attack, the transient's getting through. But the fast release is also what makes that more aggressive. Because if we use a slow release, so if we do like slow attack, let's go up to like kind of the right hand side here. With the fast release, generally release time will just make the compressor sound more aggressive. When we have a fast release, it's working a lot harder because it's clamping down and it's letting go. It's just doing a lot. When you have a slow release, it will clamp down, but then it won't fully relax before the next onset. So it kind of, we'll get onto that in a second, how that sounds. But that fast release, is what gives it that kind of like punchiness. So this is a very common application of compression, like slow attack, fast release, very common.
Yeah.
Then we've got kind of one more quadrant here, and then we'll get into kind of more of the nuances of each of these. Slow attack, slow release. So we're letting the transient through, slow attack. So we're getting some of that punch. We're not like clamping down on it a ton, but that slow release just sounds very different. A word I really like for this is gooey. Traditionally, people will say that's maybe smooth.
Yeah.
Or even thick. I think people quite often will say thick is like fast attack, slow release. But I still find that having that kind of slower attack with that slower release still has this kind of, smooth, thick. Some people describe that as like more musical. It's just more subtle, basically. And these two is, at least kind of in my experience, is where I spend a lot of my time with compression. And that's why I often say like the most important control in the compressor, other than threshold ratio, because arguably that's the most important, because if you don't do anything, it's not going to compress, and that dictates how much compression happens. But in terms of the tone of the compressor, the most important control in many ways is the release time. Because if we're using like kind of a slow attack a lot of the time, or on like an SSL channel strip, the default compressor attack time is like 30 milliseconds. Like that's quite a common place to kind of sit, 10, 30 milliseconds. And LA2A is like about 10 milliseconds. So assuming we're in that kind of ballpark on the attack time, then the main difference we're going to get is like fast release versus slow release. Like that is going to have a big impact on our tone. So just to demonstrate that again, as I'll move this release time around, and as I pull it faster, notice how it sounds more aggressive, punchier, but it's just doing more. It's a lot more noticeable. And then as we go slower, it kind of slows down. It sounds like smoother, more musical, gooier is the word that I like. So it's a pretty clear difference compared to like, you know, if I play around with the knee. There is an audible difference because that's affecting how much compression's happening, because we're changing
kind of the curve of it.
Exactly, right? Yeah, like when we go softer. But the difference is a lot less noticeable, right? It's compared to like going from slow release to fast release, it's not huge. And then same with a lot of these. There is a discernible difference there. Quite often with some of these settings, the difference that you're hearing is just that the amount of gain reduction that's happening changes. Because like going from peak to RMS, for example, is changing how the compressor's listening to the audio. There is kind of like a tonal difference, but it's primarily, we're just changing how much gain reduction is happening. Similar with like fast feed forward and feedback. There is a difference, but it's subtle compared to, you know, this. So this is where I think of kind of being the main zone where you exist a lot of the time. And then it really just comes down to like why you would do one over the other. And still, like, there are going to be situations where you're kind of like down here for like bass or certain problems, or up here. I'm not saying don't do those, but if you want to kind of like simplify it in your mind, it's like, well, actually fast attack, fast release, managing transients, I can just use a limiter or a clipper for that. I don't need to like, that doesn't need to exist in my brain as yet another application of compression. I can kind of mentally pass that off to different tools. Fast attack, slow release. There is like something else that can be nice about that, which is like thickening things up. So if we go here, do fast attack, slow release. So yeah, so the way I think about that tonally is we're often like subduing things. It kind of like subdues the energy, which can be really helpful. Like if you want something to sound more relaxed, if you have like a drum part that sounds quite aggressive and you're trying to make a song that's a bit more chilled out and you're like, actually I want to pull this back a little bit, then that can be helpful. But a lot of the time when we're adding a compressor, it's because we're looking for more. Again, unless it's a very specific problem that you're solving, which is like this snare is like way too punchy and I want to like tame that transient. But yeah, it kind of like how it affects the feel of it is, yeah, it kind of like thickens things up. If we then compare like slow release and then between like, we can compare attack time as well. So yeah, that definitely can be helpful. But as we then think about these kind of 4 quadrants, primarily thinking about it through a lens of like attack and release time, everything else kind of falls into place because there are certain kind of correlations with other settings with each of these. For example, if you were doing like fast attack, fast release, and you're trying to manage transients, are you more likely to use a hard knee or a soft knee? Right, because otherwise you're not really getting the degree of control you would want. And are you more likely to use a low ratio or a high ratio?
Well, higher ratio.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because you would set your threshold to kind of get the transients, but then like a limiter, you would want to be quite aggressively handle those transients once it hits a threshold. If we were trying to do that, like tame the transients, and we use like a low ratio, like we're still, it works with 2:1, but more likely we would use like a higher threshold and a higher ratio because we're just trying to catch those peaks. Versus if we're trying to make something punchy, we're probably going to have like a lower threshold where we're kind of like massaging the audio more constantly, and because of that, like a lower ratio. So this is where we can kind of like start to think about each of these. So hard knee, high ratio. What about peak versus RMS? So in peak, it's reacting to it. If you imagine like a channel meter, like a peak meter is seeing that, it's just seeing the peak level and it's reacting to that. Whereas in RMS, it's actually taking like a window of time. So either 5 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, 25, 50, or 100. So if you imagine like a 100 millisecond window, it's actually looking at that. And that might be the length of 100 milliseconds is like, that whole snare sample we were looking at, that entire sample with like the end of the tail is probably about 100 milliseconds. So if we were doing fast attack, fast release, hard knee, high ratio, like a limiter, would we want to use peak or RMS?
Oh, peak.
Right, exactly. And then feedback, feed forward, the difference between those, it's just where the compressor listens in the signal chain. So in feed forward, it sees the audio, then that dictates how much gain reduction happens. So, let's say something comes in at 10 dB, but the threshold's set at minus 15. It's like, okay, the detector sees that it's above the threshold by 5 dB. It then tells the gain reduction element to reduce it by, let's say, 2.5 dB at a 2:1 ratio. So it's kind of like, it happens in the logical order you would basically expect. It's like, audio comes in, is it too loud or too quiet? Yes or no, turn it down. That's feed forward. What's interesting is this actually came later. So all of the kind of early compressors were feedback. Basically any analog compressor, other than like once you get into kind of later compressors, VCA compressors, like channel strips, they're feed forward. But a lot of the kind of original like LA2As, 1176, Verimuse, Fairchilds, that kind of stuff, they're all feedback design. And basically the way that works, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but it's actually looking at the audio after it gets reduced. So the kind of, instead of going audio, detector, gain reduction, it goes audio, gain reduction, detector, and it feeds back around. So what it's actually listening to or looking at, depending on how you think of it, is the signal after it's already been reduced. So what that means is it kind of has like a self-correcting nature. Because if you imagine like, okay, at 0 milliseconds, it's like the audio comes in, it's too loud, but nothing will happen yet because it gets through the gain reduction element before it hits the feedback. So it hits the detector, so it doesn't even know yet. But then it will say, oh, that was too loud, turn it down. So it's kind of like if you imagine you are the compressor, right? And you've been given a set of instructions, which is like when it's too loud, turn it down. Well, that's basically it, right? When it's too loud, turn it down. If you were feed forward, you'd be looking at the input up here. It's too loud, let me turn it down. If you were feedback, you'd be looking at the output, maybe on like the VU meter or something. So you'd say, it's too loud, I'm turning it down. Okay, now it's quiet enough. So you would kind of back off. You would like self-correct. Versus if you were looking at the input, you'd be like, it's still too loud, I'm going to pull it down even more because you can't see that you've turned it down. So it's hard to wrap your head around, but that's kind of how I think about it. The actual like impact of that in terms of how it sounds is that feedback sounds similar. People use a lot of similar words, more musical, gooey, because it's self-correcting, like the actual gain reduction that happens changes a little bit, but very similar to like fast attack and slow release, it just kind of slows things down. Like feed forward is quite fast, punchy, because it's like responding instantly. Feedback is quite slow, smooth, because there's like a bit of a delay there. It's not as aggressive because it will kind of ease off once it's turned things down. So if we go back to our kind of quadrants, if we were using fast attack, fast release to control transients, would we want feed forward or feedback? Right, exactly. in terms of like models, specific kind of compressor models that are like that, like fast attack, fast release, it's like VCA basically. That's the only thing that can, well, I get an 1176. So we could say 1176 is fast attack, fast release, and also VCA, because VCA compressors can do kind of anything. They can be however, they've got quite a wide range of possible settings, similar to like a plugin or a digital compressor. Whereas an 1176, it can only do a very specific range on its attack and release. So yeah, again, 1176, that correlates with like percussion. And VCA, you can kind of just do whatever the hell you want. So that would be another example there. Does that all make sense? Can you see now how it's like when you think about this as like these 4 buckets, it all kind of falls into place a little bit? And we can do the same. Let's go over here first. So if we were doing punchy, slow attack, fast release, what kind of knee would we want for that generally? We're not trying to control the transient, we're letting the transient through.
Softer one. Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Soft knee ratio?
Like 2-to-1?
Lower, but not.
Lower, but not necessarily low.
Yeah.
But if we want to simplify, we could say low ratio, because again, instead of like, we're not trying to just catch the transients, we're actually trying to kind of massage the whole audio. So generally we would like pull down the threshold, and I guess we could even add threshold here, which is like high threshold, where we're just getting the transients, versus like a low threshold where we're getting kind of everything.
Yeah.
Peak or RMS?
Probably peak, so you can, so as far as you can retain that punchiness, retain how much punchiness you want to have.
Right, you have a bit more control with peak because it's like more precise.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I knew it. I knew exactly what you're trying to say. Yeah, so I think it could be either. Like RMS is going to be more relevant. So yeah, when we kind of get down here with like, if we want to slow things down even more. But I think because we're doing a slow attack anyway, it's like you could do either. And then similar with like feed forward, feed back, it could be, could basically be either. I mean, if we wanted to simplify it, we could say, yeah, peak and feed forward. That does generally sound punchier because it'll be like faster, more responsive on the release, because we're still like slow attack, fast release. So we don't want to slow things down too much.
I think I would like start with peak and feed forward. And then,
Yeah, 100%.
depending, and then adapt as if you want more or less of everything, to get where you want to go.
Totally. With a lot of this, in terms of like how it affects the tone, you can just try stuff out. It's just, they'll sound slightly different. So either way, this is like, none of this is hard and fast rules. It's exactly like starting points. And then it's like, oh, let me just try RMS, see how that sounds. You want to have some intention, but it is just a starting point. Exactly. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to like hit play, listen to this drum part. Okay, I know that, and he's exactly a 10 millisecond attack, a 50 millisecond release, like feed forward. It's like, okay, you need to know the ballpark. And same with EQ, right? It's like you listen to something, it's like, it's kind of muddy. You don't need to necessarily know off the bat that it's like, it sounds more like 220 hertz than 450 hertz. It's like, muddy is close enough. At least it's like a starting point, and then you can kind of move around. And I'd say it's the same. It's like, have a starting point. And in that sense, even using presets, it's like fine to some extent, but I think ultimately it's good to kind of understand where you're going and why, and then kind of like tweak from there.
It took me years to even hear the compressor. I could use it, I could see the needle go. One day you actually hear it. It's like, well, wow moment. Because I used to overdo it. It's easy to overdo it. Like put 4-to-1,
I mean, 4-to-1, I would still say is pretty like average. I wouldn't say it's particular. It's once you get past like 6-to-1, then you start to get into like limited territory. But anything from like 3 to 4-to-1, I would think of as like normal. And then 2-to-1 is like low for like mastering. And even like Mixbus compression, I'll often find that I go closest to like 3-to-1, because if I'm mixing a rock track, for example, it's like actually you want some of that. noticeable aggressiveness.
Good question for you. Do you typically use a compressor on your Mixbus?
Depends on the genre.
Okay.
Rock, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Anything with like real instruments, yes. If it's like EDM or hip hop, maybe. That's where it's like, it depends. Definitely not all of the time though. It's just like
to get more thickness, right? More.
Yeah, it's just a very specific sound. Like sometimes with like, well, so for example, if you think about EDM, Mixbus compression in an EDM context is often a lot more about like side chain to get like the noticeable pumping. That would be like a big application of Mixbus compression in EDM, which is very different to kind of how you would use Mixbus compression in rock, which is like, yeah, you just kind of slam everything.
That's usually what I do is rock. So
yeah. And in that case, yeah, 100%. And a lot of the time, if I'm mixing rock, I think about what would I do if I was mixing on like an SSL, because that is just the classic rock sound. If you think about like Chris Lord-Alge, a lot of these like, yeah, even like Michael Brower, a lot of these big mixers who did a lot of the rock stuff and are really big compression fanatics, they would have been mixing through an SSL, and yeah, the Mixbus compression would have just always been on, like from the get-go.
I used to do it, and then I kind of took it off of my Mixbus, and then I used it on the mastering. You know? I normally mix into it. Okay. Well, actually not always, it depends, but I think that's fine. Depends how you approach mastering. Like these days I just master in the same project. So I won't kind of like do Mixbus compression, then bounce it down, then master it, and maybe use a second compressor. I tend to just have like one compressor on my output, and that is also, it's my Mixbus compressor, but it's also my like mastering compression, rather than like doing it in multiple stages. Yeah. But it's pretty common to mix into it if you're going to do it, especially with rock. Again, because on an SSL, it would just be on from the get-go, and you can kind of factor it in because it will change. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but this is why more and more I found myself mastering within projects, is because you can kind of start with the end in mind. So if you're going to have Mixbus compression anyway, it's often better to like bring that in early, because it's going to change the nature of your balance. It's going to change the nature of how much compression you add to the other instruments, and you can kind of factor it in as you go, rather than like you get the mix sounding really good and then you shove a compressor and a limiter on it and now it sounds completely different. So that's why even now, like, you'll see us more and more like mixing into a limiter as well. Yeah, and Mixbus tends to be probably in like this zone, like slow attack, slow release. Any kind of specific compressors come to mind for slow attack, fast release? Like a LA2A maybe?
LA2A, yeah, so LA2A is slow attack, but it's quite a slow release as well.
Slow release, yeah.
It's basically just a VCA. It's like the only thing that can really, like and some, to an extent, like a very mu. But I think on a very mu you can get down to, let's see, this is like 0.3, so like 300 milliseconds, which I still, that's like medium. I wouldn't call it like fast. But yeah, the main thing would be like a VCA, which is typically what we would associate with like punchiness. But also, I mean, an LA2A can sound pretty punchy as well. But we start to get into this like slower release zone. But because it's still got a slow attack, we're still letting through a lot of the transient on an LA2A. So you get that transient emphasis that creates punch, but then that slow release kind of nudges it into that kind of like smoother, gooier territory. Just to finish this off, let's do these last two. So Gooey, Mixbus compression, or slow attack, slow release. Any kind of like buses, drum buses, that tends to work quite well. Like bass guitars, that can also work quite well when it's like sustained notes and we don't want like pumping. Because if it's like a sustained note and you can hear the compressor clamp down and then really quickly release, it's quite noticeable. Whereas that slower release, it's a bit more like musical. Would you want low threshold or a high threshold for that? Like, would we want to just catch the transients with like a high threshold, or would we want to kind of get everything?
You want to
get everything. Soft knee, again, like we can run through these quick because it's very similar. So yeah, we would probably lean more towards a soft knee, lower ratio, because again, we're kind of grabbing everything and like kind of more consistently massaging it. And then this is where like some of these settings, we might lean more towards the slower end. So we just want to slow everything down. So slower release RMS, feedback, they are two more controls that will kind of lend to that like gooiness. Like if you just kind of A/B them in isolation. Smoother or like less punchy, right? Like on that fast feed forward, you can really hear it working. And then in terms of like specific models, I mean, VCA is going to be in like all of these because you can basically do any kind of range with a VCA. Slow attack, slow release, definitely like Vari fits that. That is the classic like tube compressor sound, is like thickness or like, yeah, gooiness, smoothness. And then again, the LA2A could in theory be there because it's got like the slow release. So yeah, very similar, but definitely not like an 1176.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to simplify this, actually, we could probably say like LA2A, I think if anything, it lives more up there and Vari lives kind of down here. And if I wanted that sound, I actually wouldn't reach for a VCA really. So we can kind of simplify that just to like Vari. In terms of like Mixbus compressors, mastering compressors, if you A/B'd like an SSL bus compressor to like a Fairchild or like any kind of like tube valve based compressor, the VCA would probably sound quite a bit punchier and the Vari would sound quite a bit gooier. So while you could do, in theory, you can do slow attack, slow release on a VCA, we wouldn't necessarily associate it as much with like that sound traditionally. It's like very much like a tube thing, like any of the thermionic culture compressors, yeah, like the Manly, Vari, Fairchild, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we've got one more here. So fast attack, slow release. So thickening things up, problem solving. If we have like really transient, like a really transient snare or like a really transient guitar, aggressive picking, that kind of stuff.
Drum bus.
Low threshold or high threshold? Do we want to just catch the transients or do we want to catch everything?
We catch those transients.
If you're like problem solving, it's probably going to be like a higher threshold because you're just trying to catch like that specific thing and a higher ratio. Or it could even be like both. It could be like a low threshold but a higher ratio, harder knee. Yeah, we're like pulling it down even more. Like instead of just trying to grab the transient but be quite like precise and hard and fast about it, we're trying to kind of grab more of the transient. Yeah, it could go either way, but generally I think it aligns quite a lot with up here, like harder knee, higher ratio, peak, feed forward. I mean, that's where you could do, again, because we're like slow release here, you could go for like those slower settings like RMS feedback, but normally we're trying to be like quite precise. We're trying to solve a specific problem, or with bass, we still want that fast attack, so feedback wouldn't really work because we would miss the transient for the most part. Not literally, like it will still get the transient, it's pretty quick. In physical equipment, the feedback process is like instant. In the digital realm, it's like 1 millisecond. Oh, sorry, 1 sample. So it's like very quick, but it still means that initial moment gets through unprocessed because the compressor hasn't seen it yet. So that first transient is always gonna, even if it's just like the first sample of that snare hit or that guitar pick, it's gonna get through. So we wouldn't want to use that. And yeah, this is, I wouldn't say like 1176 isn't really like slow release. Vari, even on a Vari, I think the fast, often like on a Fairchild, the fastest attack time is still pretty slow. 0.2 minutes, that's pretty fast, 200 microseconds.
Fast, yeah.
So yeah, we could put Vari in that category. And depending on what settings we have, slow attack or fast attack is going to dictate if we get like kind of gooiness or thickness, basically. That's the idea, is just kind of lumping it into these 4 buckets and simplifying it. And I find myself over here a lot.
Yeah, me too.
This, I'll just use a limiter. And then one of the other questions was like clipping. That would very much live up here in this quadrant, which is like just shaving off transients, basically, to free up headroom for mastering. So if you go into like Delta Solo on open compressor, and then we listen to the clipping, super fast. It's like we're just literally grabbing like single samples almost. And what you're actually hearing there is the distortion on the clipper. So, because that's all a clipper is distortion. But if you, like with a saturation plugin, you have a drive control, right? You kind of, or down here, if we're just adding saturation, we're just adding saturation to everything based on drive. Whereas a clipper, it's basically the same thing. It's just saturation, distortion, but we're setting a threshold. Instead of driving everything, we're saying, if it gets above that threshold, distort it. So if we pull it all the way down, just distortion. But normally what you would do is just, grab these initial transients. And that distortion is so fast that you don't really hear it unless we literally solo it. So that's, very much like this quadrant. And this is really important for mastering. If you manage your transients while you're mixing, and you, like snares, kicks, and there's like a balance to be had there, because if you've seen us do like foundation first method, or if you've seen Kevin mix, he's like big on transients. So he's often enhancing transients. Whereas clipping, you're often doing the opposite. You're like getting rid of them. And you can kind of do both, because with a lot of transient shapers, you're not literally just grabbing like that first sample. You might be grabbing like a larger chunk of the transient. So you can kind of do both at the same time. I've never actually tried to like demo that, but it'd be interesting to see if we like got a snare. If we clip it, and we can Delta Solo. So there, that's literally all we're getting, is that like very fast little sample. Whereas like with transient shaping, but you can see here, it's not just getting like that first part, it's getting, that's what we're enhancing. We're like turning that up or down, which is very different to this. So you can kind of do both, right? Like you can enhance the transient and at the same time get rid of that very initial onset that might take up 3 dB of headroom, but doesn't really like add anything or make a difference audibly because it's such an instant moment. The clipper will shave that off, and then that frees up like 3 dB of headroom. What we could do now is go through a real mix and each of those applications, find some problems and use the different kind of methods. So, okay, straight away, I'll write this down for once we finish the balance, but lead vocal, we could just say inconsistent, which is going to be, if it was like pop or hip hop or something like that, you might start with like automation, because we would want maybe a more kind of transparent, natural sound. But anything rock, just slam it with the compressor, because that's the sound we expect, and also that's going to manage the levels for us, and maybe a bit of limiting as well. that one. Come down. Cool. So there's our balance. As we're focusing on compression, what comes to mind? Like, are there any specific problems that you're hearing that we could solve with compression, or any enhancements that we could do with compression?
I think I would knock the attack off the crashes and let it build more with sustain.
So that you get, yeah, it doesn't cut through as much the moment it comes in, but you still get the washiness of it. Yeah, potentially. I mean, it'd be interesting anyway to... I think to me it was just maybe a little bit loud, but yeah, that's definitely something we could try. Something I'm hearing is that emphasis on that hi-hat does cut through quite a lot, and it's not a bad thing because it's just a stereo loop. We're obviously limited in what we could do, but I want the kick and the snare to be louder and the hi-hat to be quieter, is what I'm hearing. So how might we do that?
Use the sidechain filter and not apply it to those lower frequencies.
Sidechain filter on a compressor to focus in on the hi-hat, you mean?
To not compress the kick. So
yeah.
Bring that up so that the kick isn't affected.
Interesting, yeah. So
Maybe even go higher than like the body of the snare, would that also leave the snare out of being compressed? If you can go there.
that was my initial thought, was like, okay, well, if we just use a fast attack, fast release, can we, this is the new open compressor, this is V2. Yeah, pretend you didn't say anything. So going back, okay, so if we go back to our quadrant, the hi-hats are it's fast and loud. So if we just use a fast attack and fast release, we can like grab it just in the moment that it's too loud and then potentially kind of let go before it affects anything else. You think of it as like a transient, basically. It's like quite a transient piece of the drum kit that we want to tame, subdue. So either kind of like up here, fast attack, fast release, we could just try a limiter. But the challenge there is we're just getting the kick, right? Because in terms of like overall volume and weight, the hi-hat is lower than the kick and the snare. But because it's in the mid-range, it sounds really loud. So your suggestion, which is a really good example here of like sidechain emphasis. So this is a new feature on V2. It's got like a sidechain listen. And what we can do here is we can find where that hi-hat is. The challenge is it's quite similar to the snare, right? So, or we can filter it. A bit higher than that, maybe. Maybe there we're getting a lot of the snare as well, right? So yeah, so we're getting too much of the snare. So could have worked. We could use a stem splitter, that kind of thing, but we won't go into that now. Even though it didn't really work in that case, it's like a good thought process of like, okay, is that something that I can use compression for? What else did we say? We said the crashes. So where would you put it in these quadrants if we were we've got a crash, the initial onset's too loud, but we want to subdue the transient. So it's probably going to be somewhere over here, but fast attack or slow, fast attack, but then fast release or slow release?
I would think so.
Slow. Yeah, I would probably default to that, because I think if we go fast, it'll just, you can kind of think of like transients as long and short transients, right? And this is something where if we go like really fast, it might get the initial thing, but we probably want to grab quite a lot of it. So if we do fast attack and fast release, hard knee, higher ratio, peak, feed forward, and that's just, I'm aligning with everything we kind of came up with here. I mean, that kind of works because it's still, above the threshold, even in those later parts. So it's continuing to grab it. And actually, it's not very transient. So that kind of, in that case, it kind of works because it's continuing to be below the threshold anyway. If we went for slow release, slow release feels like it's kind of like we're countering the fade out, the sustain, in a nice way where it's kind of like managing that relationship for us. So this is without. And then this is with. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. So yeah, so that's a good example of like, okay, what's the intent, thinking it through, slow attack, slow release, for sure, you know, there's a degree of experimentation there. And then the next one we said was vocals.
You know what I need? A little lean back in the seat.
So for this kind of music, where do you think we will sit at? Do we want punchy or do we want thick or gooey, limiter, any, all of the above? Where did you kind of...
Attack.
And why slow attack?
Because he's not like super open in
Not
the face.
not
He's
problem
like, very
solving.
just in the pocket of it.
Yeah. Yep. So to kind of give it more excitement, more aggression.
Yeah, without it just being like right up in the face.
Mm-hmm.
They feel more like atmospheric vocals than like, you know, really want you to like focus punchy vocal. That's kind of just what I'm leaning towards.
Yeah. I agree. And this is the thing, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
So then it just becomes, there's like technical challenges, right? Like problem solving just there. It's like we're not thinking about emotion particularly. It's like this thing is grabbing my attention and distracting me from the music.
Yeah.
And that's the technical side, or the left brain, right? But then with something like the vocal, we are trying to solve a problem, which is that at some moments it's just too loud / too quiet, depending on how you think about it. But the way we could do that is like quite subjective. As long as we use a compressor, it's going to achieve that outcome. But then do we use fast attack, fast release, like that? And that's where it comes down to kind of subjective right brain, like, well, both could work. If you were thinking about like the emotion of this track though, you have to start thinking about like, well, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to make it, is it like really upbeat and aggressive? Or is it a little bit more relaxed?
For sure.
And you know, if it was like a punk track or like a really aggressive rock track, then we might edge towards, okay, like slow attack to really get that transit, and also faster release to like really slam it and get it moving a lot. Something like this. Kind of got this like laid back. What are the lyrics?
A little lean back in the seat.
Literally says lean back.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a clue.
There's a clue, yeah. And I often do that. I listen to the lyrics, and sometimes that throws you off because you might get the Smiths or something where it's like the music is really happy and the lyrics are like depressing as hell.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you can kind of also look to the lyrics for clues. So in this case, yeah, I would edge more towards like this part of the quadrant. And, you know, to your point, we could probably do some fast stuff to just problem solve more so. That's not going to affect the emotions as much if we're just grabbing transients that are really loud. It's more managing our transients, thinking about headroom, thinking about like where it sits in the mix. And you could do 1176 into an LA2A. These days I tend to just use a limiter also because it's easy on open compressor because it's like right there. That's the reason why the limiter is actually before the compressor on this, so that you can do stuff like that without having to use like a separate plugin. So we can use a limiter to catch the really loud parts.
Right.
You know what I need? A little lean back in the seat. But you know what I need? But you know what I need? A little lean back in the seat.
So you can kind of see that's, you know, just visually looking at it, you can see where like the really big transients are here, here, here. So that's where we can kind of adjust our limiter threshold or like initially a fast compressor.
I was built for speed.
Just to grab those. And that's where we're up here, higher threshold, harder knee, higher ratio, because we're just trying to catch those loud parts. And it's not going to change the emotion that much because it's only coming in like every...
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love don't come cheap.
It's only coming in like a few times per phrase. Yeah, go on.
Can you dial it in with the LA2A instead of the open compressor just to kind of...
Yeah? Wait, hold on. You mean an 1176?
Oh, no, like the LA2A.
Well, that would be the next one, right? So we would do, for the first stage, if we're doing shaving off transients,
Oh, true, yeah, okay.
we would do, the equivalent there would be like an 1176.
Yeah. Grab the initial ones and then put the LA2A after that.
So we would want like fast attack, fast release in theory. And again, like the attack ranges on here are so fast anyway that, but if we're just trying to grab those louder parts, higher ratio,
I was built for speed.
and then adjust the input so that we're just getting
Like 2 to 3 maybe.
these like loud parts.
I was built for speed. You got a fire. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gas. I was built for speed. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline.
That kind of thing. And then the second compressor where we're going down is like this kind of range, or here. So we kind of came to the conclusion that like we might not want punchy.
Right.
So this might be too punchy.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love.
So that versus say like a very mu, which would be down here. So we want to bring out a bit of aggression with that slow attack. Like I think this would be we're already doing like a fast attack to just get those like louder parts. So our main kind of gain reduction tool, we spoke about the emotion. It's going to be kind of more down here. Yeah, like slow attack, slow release.
I was built for speed. You got a fire.
And now we want to grab like everything. So like we don't even have a ratio control on here.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love don't come cheap. I was built for speed. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline.
And that's probably too slow because now it's just not really, there's going to be a sweet spot because if we go too slow, it's just not going to manage the volume enough because it's just
I was built for speed.
Constantly stuck in
You got a fire.
versus
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline.
that's a bit too much. So maybe somewhere in the middle.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love.
And it is like thickening it up.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this kind of love. I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline with this kind of love.
And then, yeah, straight away my ear goes to like tonal issues. It's quite muddy. That's also bearing it in the mix a bit. But if we're just kind of focusing on compression here, yeah, I think that's a good example of like, there's no right or wrong. It's just, that's when you move into like emotional intent, not just like technical intent. Yeah, and then the last thing we could do here is some Mixbus compression as well, because we said about mixing into that. We already know we're going to be probably down here, but there's still like a range. Like this is, you know, you could think of it as like we could be somewhere in the middle here, right? It's not like actually this simple, because if we have like a medium attack and a medium release, we're in the middle. Or if we have like a medium attack and a slow release, you know, it might be kind of more here than like here. And as we kind of go into like this territory, this is like more kind of SSL territory, and then this is kind of like more very mu territory. So again, the conversation we just had was like, okay, well, this is probably not something we want to be like super punchy. So we're probably going to lean more towards like a very mu on the Mixbus as well, as opposed to like an SSL, which can be quite punchy, or like an API 2500, which can also be like pretty punchy. And here we've got a very mu, where is it? Is it mastering? Manu very mu glue.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline with this kind of love don't come cheap. You know what I need.
Continuing the example of emotion, even like little things like your high pass filter. Okay, if we know that no high pass filter means the kick is a bit more noticeable and it's like causes more pumping rhythmically, it kind of enhances things, right? Versus like 200 hertz, 150 hertz or something on a high pass, we're going to be ignoring the kick and it's going to create more of a kind of like constant groove as opposed to this like big sucking in every time the kick hits. For this track, which do we think could work better?
Yeah, we want the kick to come through. We want a high pass at 200 or something, 120.
To
allow the kick through.
Right, without ducking. Yeah, I would think of it as like, do we want this to sound more like a dance track? Probably not. So yeah, we'll want to high pass that.
I was built for speed.
Versus
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gas.
I mean, the kick's pretty low anyway because it's like buried in that loop. We could always boost it. We should probably do like a shelf.
A lot of beef on that kick.
It's a nice kick. Just a random side note, I love doing filters like this, like shelves like this, where you get the little cut just above it. It just means you can kind of get the thing you want, which is more low end, but then sometimes you end up adding like mud and it just like fixes that.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline with this kind of love don't come cheap.
This is kind of like more constant.
You know what I need? A little lean back in the seat. You can show me how to take a fast car slow.
So again, just a quick comparison here. If we went like, I mean, this is actually pretty fast.
I was built.
It should be like here.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline with this kind of love don't come cheap.
You can hear that like enhances the rhythm,
You know what I need?
whereas this gives us a more kind of,
Back in the seat. You can show me how to take a fast car slow.
cool. Any questions about that?
Can I see how you'd kind of dial that in with the SSL G, the bus compressor?
Yeah, so that is going to sound punchier for sure. But we still have like slow release times. So yeah, similar thing, high pass.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline. But this kind of love don't come cheap. You know what I need? A little laying back in the seat. You can show me how to take.
So now like the difference between this and this is literally just going from here
I was built for speed.
down to here.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline. But this kind of love don't come cheap.
You can kind of like think of the shape of it almost. It's like this is like that, and then slow is like that.
Feel you prefer that slow release for this kind of song?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like totally subjective.
Just taste,
It's just what I would be thinking is like, how do I want this to feel? Is it meant to be? Do I want to add more excitement and make it more energetic, or do I actually want to pull things back a little bit and make it feel more kind of subdued and thicker? And both could work. Like neither of those is wrong.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in.
To me, that feels too much, and it's partially it's thinking about emotion or feeling, not thinking about feeling about emotion, but then also taste, right? Like that is, and they kind of like related, but like different genres have different sounds that you would normally go for. Or you develop your own preferences over time, and some mixers, some producers might have a preference towards like faster release times for whatever reason. But yeah, I would, for this, something like this, I would go slower. Again, no right or wrong. So anytime it's like, what should I do? These all just sound different. And I think a lot of people, when they're mixing, they just make things sound different. They don't really have an intent. And maybe, yeah, the first step is like problem solving. If there are like, there's muddiness and all these issues, then like the first step is get it to a decent baseline. But from that point onwards, it's like extremely subjective. So that's where it's like thinking about like, okay, well, what do I actually want it to sound like? Am I solving problems, which is like kind of more on the right side here? Am I solving transient issues? Or am I just shaping the tone? And then, you know, fast release versus slow release is going to be the biggest variable you have in like how it changes the feel of it. And then in terms of like the different analog models, yes, they all have box tone, but the biggest difference between them is just these different attack and release profiles. That's why they, for the most part, like if you compare a Very to an LA2A, it sounds different because they have different attack and release timings or multiple stages of attack and release. So hopefully that kind of helps bring it all together a bit more. It's funny because the further I get, the more I actually just want to simplify things down to like, when I'm actually mixing, I'm just like fast attack or fast release. It's the classic, it's like the more you know, the less you understand, or what is the Socrates quote? The more I learn, the more I know nothing, or whatever.
Right.
It's kind of like you get to the point where it's like, there's so many controls and the difference that they make are noticeable, but pretty subtle. And then when you zoom out all the way to like, what's the end listener actually going to notice? It's like, is it compressed, yes or no? Is it like fast attack or fast release? They're like the big things, really. Feed forward, feedback. It's like, it's pretty subtle. I wouldn't be worrying about it too much.
If you're a self-recording artist and you're really passionate about music, you're serious about honing your craft and learning how to produce, mix and master music to a professional level at home, then you might be a good fit for our flagship program, which is called The Reverse Engineer. It's a multi-year comprehensive program where we actually teach in reverse. We start with mastering, turn you into a professional mastering engineer, then we cover mixing, do that to a professional level, and finally production and recording. It consists of an extensive curriculum that most people take a year or two to get through, a really engaged community of incredibly supportive people, 60 plus hours a week of mentorship on Zoom with our team of mentors, which includes Grammy winning and multi-platinum diamond certified engineers. And then at the end, we have a certification process where you can pass an exam and get your hands on a gold plaque just like this. Now, just quickly here, I actually want to invite you to apply it for a scholarship, because if you're here watching our content on YouTube, it probably means you know quite a lot of our stuff already and you've already made some progress. So below you'll find a link to learn more about the reverse engineer, but also there'll be a link to apply for a scholarship. Every month or so we offer one full ride scholarship and also multiple partial scholarships. So it'll take about 10 minutes to apply, but you may as well give it a shot. You never know what will come out of it. You'll fill out an application form. At the end, you'll then book your review session with someone on our admissions team where they'll go over your application and let you know if you qualified for any scholarships or not. So either way, go and check it out. Thanks for watching.